delete that one there.
Check one. Thank you. A pleasant good evening. Certainly, we want to thank God for this wonderful evening, and we will not wait on those who are not here. We have to let the debate begin. Amen. And so tonight we are blessed that you've taken this time and opportunity to be with us here tonight. And Mr. Walking is here. He's going to lead us in a song, The Right Hand of God. We'll stand and we'll sing To God Be the Glory, two voices to set the atmosphere for tonight, after which we're going to ask Pastor Robin Strawn to lead us in a time of prayer. It's number 4 in the blue book if you need it. To God be the glory, things he has done. Love the world and made his life and atone. Great things he has done, and great are rejoicing, Jesus the Son, but purer and higher and greater. Let the people rejoice, oh come to the Father through Jesus the Son, and give him the glory, great things he has done. Please remain standing. Pastor Robin Strawn of the Good News Ministry will lead us in an invocation.
Come on, somebody shall praise the Lord. Amen. Amen. It's good to be here tonight. Let us bow in prayer. Most gracious, eternal, and all-wise God, Father, we thank you for everyone that is present here this evening. Father, we thank you for this opportunity that we can come, Lord, to discuss and to debate a very important issue tonight, one that may be controversial in some respects. But Father, we thank you, Lord, for this opportunity. And we ask, dear God, that you will guide our thoughts, Lord God, as we speak and engage our expert panelists tonight, Father, that men we would have, Father, we thank you again, and we ask that you will bless this debate tonight, for we ask it all in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Amen.
Thank you so much. We thank you, Pastor Strawn, and you may be seated at this time. We're going to invite Minister Heather Wood, who's going to come and bring welcome remarks. And we're going to fast track tonight. With welcome and recognition of guests. You all come on, give her a hand as she comes.
Good evening, everyone. Actually, mine, I think, is the easiest job here tonight. All I have to do is to make sure that everybody feels welcome. I'm not here to convince you. I'm not here to convert you. I'm not here to persuade you. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm just up here to tell you all feel welcome. So I was going to say on behalf, but I think I should say on be-third, and I'll tell you why in a moment. Because I'm wearing 3 hats tonight. I'm wearing a hat of the, let me get it right now, the side of Farrington Road, where it has been for the last 60+ years. I welcome you. Now, presenters, Dr. Linwood Brown, Faith Medical Concierge, Cannabis Clinician. That's quite a mouthful. I trust you know about Teen Challenge. He's a anger management consultant. And we certainly need that. We need our young people to know how to resolve difficulties without anger and violence. And then there's Dr. Marvin Smith.
Thank you, Minister Heather. Thank you so much. Indeed, you're playing 3 roles tonight, and we thank God for you. She represents the diaspora of Dominica, and so we thank God for her coming. And she represents Trinidad and Tobago. Come on, give her a hand as she comes.
Good evening. I've been asked to just speak to what the vision and the objectives of the Diaspora Relations Committee of the Caribbean is. Will serve as a catalyst for the embodiment of the diaspora images, voices, labors, and rewards that deserve a true sense of place in the narrative of the islands of the Bahamas. Jubilee celebrations of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. To unite the peoples of the
My phone is buzzing with those who check. 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Tonight, both the previous and present government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas seeks to introduce medicinal marijuana as a source of challenge their functionality. And so tonight, as Bahamians, we stand ready and willing to be informed and educated about what the future holds for our country with the transition from another way. How do we reconcile those things in the psyche of the Bahamian public, the social and cultural norms of our society, will be of great concern and consideration and debate tonight and in the future. And so tonight, we are here to be active participants in making things happen through this process, this platform of the great debate and conversation, medicinal marijuana, to be or not to be. I know that you can see if you're on the YouTube, but you can ask questions via Zoom once we get into the question and answer period. we would like to also indicate at this time that there are some rules that govern the House tonight that is very important for the process to be very, very cooperative. And so tonight, I wish to just read a few of, firstly, this is the house of the Lord. Therefore, we are truthful and respectful in our discourse. Each speaker has a 10-minute introductory presentation with relevant testimonies, research data. Yours truly will indicate your wrap-up 2 minutes before, if it is required. Members of the audience must orderly present themselves to available mics in the house and speak clearly as we are being live streamed. 1 minute is allowed for question or statement. There will be an in-person and virtual audience consensus we hope to have at the end of the debate and conversation, to be or not to be. And so we want to thank you. We just want to lay some rules down so that we can execute efficiently our conversation, and we are ready to begin. I wish to also acknowledge the presence of the director of the University of the West Indies, the School of Clinical Medicine and Research, Dr. Corinne Sinkwe Brown, who is here in the house. Come on, y'all, give her a hand. She has taken time out of her busy. He is here. We want to acknowledge the presence of Pastor Kelia Sotomayor Strawn. She is representing Puerto Rico, and so we want to thank you for being here this evening. And so, and you would have heard from, of course, Ms. Alicia Oxley, and of course, on our piano, representing the diaspora of the Turks and Caicos, Mr. Davil Sonny Walk-in. Come on, give him a hand. And so tonight, I just wish to introduce our presenters individually, and I know that this is going to be very, very interesting. First of all, I will introduce them in order of their presentation, and then after the introduction of them, of that particular presenter, we would invite them to come and have a seat. First, we have Dr. Linwood Brown. Dr. Brown, his objective is to become the president of Shaw University to a Brown clinical cannabis clinician. Thank you, Dr. Brown. And I want to thank Dr. Brown for just being able to stand in the gap in this very critical area where we know that he has done extensive research, and we're looking forward to his presentation. Our next presenter is Dr. Eric Fox. Dr. Fox has been working with individuals that have difficulty dealing with anger for the past 30 years after intensive training in the United States, El Salvador, Mexico, Jamaica, and Barbados. Dr. Fox is presently the Executive Director of Teen Challenge Bahamas and a consultant with Urban Renewal in the Department of Social Services in our country. Dr. Fox is an advisor on national security, co-facilitator for the Catholic Church Domestic Group. He is a licensed minister with the Assembly.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Coming home in 1999, and I was well trained by her to be or not to be medicinal cannabis in the Bahamas. Health is defined by the World Health Organization as a state of complete social, mental, and physical well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Cannabis is a plant grown either under cultivation or wildly, that contains many compounds in it that helps the body to maintain homeostasis. It is not a new drug. In fact, cannabis was used more than 12,000 years ago. It was first used as medicines in China, where it's called ma. It made its way to the West Indies through the indentured Indian laborers in Jamaica, and now to the Western world. Up to 1937 and 1942, cannabis was on the British and the American pharmacopoeia as drug agents. However, in 1970, it was scheduled as a Schedule I drug. A Schedule I drug is a drug that is prone to 2024. The Joe Biden components in it. Taboo is a component called 9-delta tetracannabinoid, or THC. This was discovered by an Israeli scientist, Dr. Raphael Mechoulam, in 1960s. His follow-up to that research in 1990s demonstrated that our bodies have endogenous cannabinoids. What that means, let me break it down. Endogenous means something innate in our bodies that we're born with, we're created with, we didn't make it, God made it, put it in us. Cannabinoids are any products of a cannabis. Like any naturally circulating chemical, it can be too high or too low. For instance, a person who's suffering from thyroid disease may have hyperthyroidism. When it's too low, they're not producing enough, and they have to get a source from the outside, what you call an exogenous source of thyroid. Similarly, persons who have diabetes may have an inefficient supply of insulin, hence we give the insulin from an external source. Well, cannabis is no different from those compounds. Since we have circulating endogenous cannabinoids, chemicals, we also have receptors on our cells to receive this component. We have found that many disease states, because of inefficient cannabinoids, whether it be THC or cannabidiol, which we call CBD, when we have inefficient of the circulating in our bodies, we experience changes in our bodies, mostly for the negative. In that persons may have anxiety because their cannabinoid levels are lower than what they ought to be. Persons may have an abnormal amount of fibromyalgia, generalized body pains, because their endogenous or their normal chemical balance of cannabis is too low. So what the Bahamas government and other countries, California and the United States, particularly in 1996, after extensive research, found that cannabis could once again play a role in healing and homeostasis and disease management. So what we seek to do as cannabis clinicians is employ another tool in our toolbox to help treat and manage disease states of patients that otherwise weren't adequately managed with the conventional medication. It's not the boogeyman. We're not here to say go out and smoke, get high, do unfounded things, cause criminal activities to increase, but to treat diseases. Imagine your mother has a painful disease, let's say multiple sclerosis as an example, spasmic multiple sclerosis, that everything else she tried failed, but we know that cannabis can help her. Should we let her suffer? Should we allow her to die in agony and pain because a medicine that was outlawed by British and American pharmacopoeia less than 80 years ago is taboo now, and this medicine could provide health, homeostasis, and disease management? Are we to let our mother, brother, sister, daughter suffer? In other instances, we've had persons who had protracted epilepsy, French word called Dravet syndrome, very difficult to manage. All conventional anti-epileptic medicine fails. What we have found, that cannabis is a very good option and helps control seizure states in these type patients almost immediately after its administration. Let's bring it closer to home. In the West Indies, glaucoma is the leading cause of preventable blindness in the region. We had a professor in Jamaica by the name of Manly West. He was a pharmacologist who researched cannabis. He found that cannabis, and this was an incidental finding, and his scientific mind was turned on. He saw that when he went fishing with fishermen in the nighttime in the rural parts of Jamaica, they had extraordinarily good night vision. And their secret, as they admitted to him, was before they go on their nighttime fishing trips, they'll drink a cup of ganja tea. Ganja is the colloquial word we use in Jamaica for cannabis. And their vision became extraordinarily sharp. So Dr. Manly West, along with Dr. Lockhart, who was an ophthalmologist practicing at the University of the West Indies, Dr. West was a pharmacy instructor, preceptor, lecturer, professor at the University of the West Indies. They did extensive research on the product, and they found that cannabis is an effective treatment modality for certain types of glaucoma. And they employed it. They got patents for it, and they produced a drug called Nassau that is in practice today to treat glaucoma. He went further, and he discovered that cannabis can also be used in a proper administrative state to treat bronchospasm brought on by asthma. And he called that product Osmolol. That too is in use today. Because of men like Manly West in Jamaica, Dr. Raphael Mechoulam in Israel, we are here today having this debate. They put in the work. They found that although cannabis can be abused like any other product, it has lots of medicinal qualities that can help prevent and manage disease states that were otherwise treatable. So in my presentation, I want to walk you through why I think cannabis for medicinal purposes should be allowed. We have many patients in the Bahamas who suffer from irretractable pain that nothing else manages. We give them opioids. You've heard it. America has an opioid abuse going on now, Percocets, morphine, and these medicines have the patients completely out of it, and they still have pain despite being on maximum doses of these much stronger narcotics, much more addictive narcotics, I must add. And cannabis now comes into play. We use it, small amounts, and it gives the patient the desired relief. That alone sold me on why we should use cannabis. To see a product that's not going to kill the patient, it's not going to cause any unintentional danger to the patient, brings such cannabis treatment for disease states. Until you have a relative, a loved one, suffer in pain that nothing else manages except cannabis, then you would not understand until you take a walk in those person's feet, or down the road, take a walk in their footsteps. I want to impress upon you that I'm not an advocate for cannabis to be smoked, used, or abused in any way it's not been designed to be used, but an advocate for the use of cannabis in a controlled setting by professionals and persons who understand the drug, persons like myself, who's a cannabis clinician, persons like Dr. Marvin Smith, who's a pharmacist, who understand the different aspects of the drug, the medication to be used. Now, we're in a church setting, so I'm going to bring up a church scenario. in the Garden of Eden, I'm a creationist. I believe in the creation story. I'm not a Big Bang theorist. I believe God created the earth and everything in it. God placed Adam and Eve in a place called the Garden of Eden. In the garden, all plants were there. God told Adam and Eve, use all of these plants, but one. Are we saying that cannabis is that one plant? Thank you.
Oh, it's going to get hot in here. Thank you, Dr. Brown, for sticking within, give or take, our timeline. We appreciate you very much. Thank you for the wealth of information you've provided, and obviously very fluent in your presentation from a historical context. Thank you so much. You all give Dr. Brown a hand again, please. And so while Dr. Brown was presenting, we were joined by Dr. Hernandez, who represents the Cuban community. Dr. Hernandez, thank you for being here very much. And we were joined by the founder of the League of Haitian Pastors, who represent the Haitian community, Dr. Cherylis Exante at the back. Dr. Exante, thank you for being here tonight. And so the diaspora are showing up tonight to get a part of this. Well, we are now ready to hear from a man who has been working the trenches with young people for many years. And he is going to come in his own way, Dr. Eric Fox.
Good afternoon. Boy, it's good to be here. It's hard to go behind Dr. Brown. I mean, that is awesome, and honestly, I'm really here to really learn from these two doctors. I have an honorary doctorate that I worked in philanthropy. I've worked with young men for the past 35 years in a program called Teen Challenge, where I myself was once a student in that program. I abused marijuana and cocaine for a period of time. It is so. I got a few messages in coming here from a couple of persons, and I guess they saw the post and they were, trying to influence me on which way to go, and they were saying stuff like, you catch the medical marijuana. I hope you're not for that. And I said, and it really all boiled down to just ignorance, Dr. Brown. Ignorance, like how you mentioned, it is taboo. What I am for, despite I've seen a lot of young men whose life has been thrown off track once they have started to use marijuana at a very early age. I see their life go topsy-turvy. And despite me working with young people now, there's a marijuana that is on the market that they call foreign. It's called foreign. It's a synthetic marijuana that is really causing a lot of psychosis in a lot of young men that comes through us. And I usually laugh. But I was healed, I was cured, and have 35 years drug-free. However, I can only give my input from what I see, and from what I see is the misuse, Dr. Brown. You cannot judge something by the misuse. Everything, and I'm going to quote a quote that I've learned from my mentor, Dr. Miles Monroe. Where abuse, where purpose is not known, abuse is inevitable. And I am, and I'm going to say this, I am more open now for the medicinal and the medical marijuana based on the experts and the research. I don't believe God put nothing on this earth without a purpose. That doesn't mean people know the purpose of something, and so because they don't know the purpose, they have a tendency just to look at the downside, or where people are just being abusive. So marijuana has been abused over the years, and because of it being abused, a lot of persons, like Dr. Brown mentioned, have this taboo that is nothing good to come out of it. Like he mentioned, this is the one plant you shouldn't fool with. And a lot of these persons are so narrow-minded that they're not even open for discussions. I am open for the research. I still have a lot of concerns. I have a lot of concerns with the plant based on the families that call me and a lot of the young men that go abroad. There's a lot of young men who use marijuana abroad, and now I've seen them coming home now because they cannot function in school. They're getting kicked out of school. They're getting kicked out of universities. They kicked out of college because the marijuana, because of the manipulation of the THC, Dr. Brown. It has this diverse effect on their lives to the point where it throws their whole life out of whack and they can't function. Now that is the abuse of the substance. But not because someone is abusing something, that doesn't mean we don't need to do research and find the proper use. People abuse things all the time. People are abusing marriages. People get married every week. Pastors abuse their position. People still come to church. Politicians abuse their position, but people still vote, right? You still put them in. And so not because something is being abused means we must just throw out the baby with the bath water. I believe we need to have a whole proper discussion and deal with the expert. I am not an expert with the medical stuff. I'm not a medical doctor, but now when I hear from Dr. Brown and of course Dr. Smith, when I hear from my colleagues, I am now, despite of what I am experiencing and what I am seeing with the young men who are abusing marijuana, I still have an open mind for it to be used in its proper form to help people who are in pain, people with sickness. If the components are there and they can come forth to make people's lives more comfortable and even bring about healing, then why not? Why not? Now, I know for sure that in working with a lot of guys who are in gangs and what's not, I know for sure it has a definitely negative effect on them emotionally, on far as them suppressing their anger and suppressing all these emotions. But the thing about it is, most of the persons who abuse marijuana have problems before they abuse the drug. And the drugs give them the ability now just to cope and to cover up pain and to deal with situations. So it is easy now for them to become addicted to something that is helping them to cope. Because once they now are down and they're not high, now they resort back to this drug. So with my treatment is to get them off the drugs, to have them wean. I work with Sandilands, where they go into detox. Once the drug is out of their system and they are right back to their normal senses, there are ways I work with them, and it's through empowerment, through education, through skills, through forgiveness, through them understanding and talking about the trauma and the different abuse that they might have experienced when they were younger. And once they have come to that point where they begin to understand and they start to develop themselves, then they become a living product. I've seen them now that they does not need to abuse these drugs anymore because they become whole now. They can function without having to abuse drugs. So my take on this medical marijuana, to be or not to be, Pastor Billis, I am leaning more with the experts. Now I know, ladies say, oh, I disagree with you. I say, well, join the line. You could disagree with me. I have to be true to myself. I am not going to stay up here and talk to try to please nobody else. I need to be true to myself, and I'm leaning to more to be. It's out there to help someone. I'm leaning to more to medical marijuana, okay? So that's my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. I have to be true to myself. And I'm relying on the experts through the process of monitoring and evaluation to make sure that what is being said, communicated, and prescribed is what is needed to make somebody better. Come on, give Dr. Fox a hand. If you don't like what he say, he can play the saxophone and calm your spirit. Please welcome our next presenter, Dr. Marvin Smith.
Good evening, everyone. Let me say thank you to the DRCC, and particularly Pastor Menace, who I've worked with on some other projects. So it's a pleasure to be here. And kudos to our first two presenters. Lindman and I both hail from the Great Bahamas Academy. That's where he learned the Bible stuff from he was talking about earlier. In addition to my roles as being the current president for the Bahamas Pharmaceutical Association and the past president for the Caribbean Association of Pharmacists, which gives me great affinity for the diaspora. It's one other thing, and I'm going to speak to that at the end. I'm also an ordained elder of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so it's never been my position that I separate who I am and what I do. And so the same way that being a scientist drives me in my discourse and my belief, being a Christian drives me in my discourse and in my belief. And so I will begin with what is the official position from the Caribbean Association and from the Bahamas Pharmaceutical Association. And then I'll give you my personal beliefs as a Christian scientist. I think both speakers have said this evening that that the question is to be or not to be, and they are advocating that we should have, there should be to be medicinal cannabis. I'm going to take it a step further and say that it's not just enough to be, but it has to be done properly. Like most things in life, my grandmother always used to say this: the devil is in the details. And it ain't what you do sometimes, but how. And so one of the things that we've looked at with the current draft of what has been proposed here, and I think the association has been consistent. I sat on the committee representing the association as its vice president and as president of the Caribbean Association under the former government, and now I've been honored to lead the association as its president. We've been very clear about this. We believe that the science is clear that there is a use for medicinal cannabis for appropriate patients and appropriate disease states. All right? I think that ship has sailed. Anybody that wants to argue that is literally arguing science as solid as if something goes up, it must come down. All right? And I tell people all the time, I don't argue science. Science speaks for itself. All right? And so this is nothing new. The US FDA has been telling us that they have been researching cannabis since 1962. And I always tell people, if they tell you that's when they start, add 40 years to it. All right? The same way when the vaccines came out for the messenger RNA vaccines, everybody was like, how did this information come so quick? They told us that they were doing that since the 70s. We know that there were studies happening from the 50s with messenger RNA and vaccines. And so the data is solid, the clinical data is out there. And I think we know that there's a need for this in certain disease states. But let's be clear about a couple of things. If you're going to make it medicinal, it must be governed as a medicine. All right? there's no need for us to recreate the wheel on this. If you're moving it from an illegal substance to a controlled substance, and while in the U.S. it's gone from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, this proposed bill that the government has put in place moves it as a scheduled drug to Schedule 1 of Part B, which is the psychotropic substances. So it acknowledges that cannabis, while it's a medicine, has what we call psychotropic effects. And that's a simple big word that means when you take it, it changes how you think and feel. Now, that's no different from morphine and Percocet or codeine, all of these things that we use on a day-to-day basis, every day, all right? But how do we use them? We don't dispense morphine and Percocet and Vicodin and codeine like we do other drugs. We dispense them under an act called the Dangerous Drugs Act with a process that protects the patient, protects the physician, and protects the pharmacist. It protects the physician by saying, when you write this, it has to be documented, and nobody can change this order without coming to you. So that a nurse or any other practitioner can't take your dispense 30 tablets of Percocet and put a 1 in front of it and make it 130. It protects the pharmacist by saying, this physician is going to send this on a specific form with a specific stamp, and if you can't verify that this is coming from a physician that you know and you know to be licensed and is properly able to practice, you don't have to fill it. Verify first, so that when we give that to a patient, we know that that patient is getting what they're supposed to get. And then most importantly, it protects the patient, because what it does is it makes sure that before they get that medication, at least 2 qualified health professionals have to see and handle that order before they get it. And if they're in the hospital, there's actually 3, because there's a nurse. So at the end of the day, because we know that these drugs have very powerful effects and can sometimes produce these psychotropic effects, all right, and can also have a high addiction potential, we've created a system in which qualified professionals deal with it every step of the way before it gets to the patient. So what's being proposed now is something different. And in long and short, read the act for yourself. What's happening is that, yes, you can have a Bahamian physician who writes it and sends it to a Bahamian licensed pharmacist who verifies it and dispenses it to a patient. But what this act will also allow is that a person can show up, Bahamian or not, with a prescription or a medical card from another jurisdiction written by a physician who we are unable to actually verify, and could take it to a cannabis dispensary in which the only qualification for the person who is to dispense that is that they have to be at least 21 years of age and not have a police record. It does not specify a specific level of training. It does not specify a specific standard that they have to meet. All right? Basically, that's the same requirement for the person who's giving you your food in the Wendy's drive-thru. Now keep in mind, they're moving this to as a controlled drug. That we have hundreds of controlled drugs that go through one mechanism. Why are we creating a completely different and much more lax mechanism if this drug is supposed to be controlled? And it's our opinion that when we look at those mechanisms, when we look at verify, but you're asking us as professionals to give them something that may help them, but could also hurt them, that we can't take the time to verify whether it's actually an authentic order, or whether this patient, in our analysis, is liable to be prone to addiction or may be exhibiting addictive behaviors. See, the difference for us is, if you're coming to us every month to get your Percocet prescription refilled, or your Vicodin prescription refilled, or your codeine prescription refilled, and we see you come back 2 weeks early and you have none of the pills left, we understand that some misuse is happening. Or vice versa. If you come back 8 weeks later, we realize you're not being compliant. But this particular model doesn't allow for any of that. And the fact that they have said that a pharmacist can oversee 5 of these dispensaries, it still eliminates the real-time, in-person, patient-to-professional interaction that should characterize any dispensing of controlled medications. If it's good for the other 121 products that are controlled substances, it should be good enough for 122. And to quote my good friend, Dr. Brown, why is this plant any different? Why should it be any different? All right? Because it certainly wasn't the plant that God told them not to eat. And so we have to be careful about these sort of things. These are critical aspects that we have to do. If we're going to do this in this country, we should do it properly. We should not make the mistakes that some of our other Caribbean countries have done, where they've created a more lax system, which in turn has created an upswing in abuse. That is something we're too small to absorb that sort of stuff. All right? We don't have millions of people for that thing to be diluted in. And so we have to be careful of that. I want to close with a paper that I wrote. Actually, 10 years ago, I wrote the first edition of this, and I've updated it year after year. And it's called Medical Cannabis in the Church. And I've actually presented this at a number of different of our churches and at the Christian Council. And I think it's important for us to look at it this way because I think it's critical. So, why is this important for us as church members? I think it's important that, one, we're honest about the pros and cons, and we are intelligent. The Bible says we must be as wise as serpents, but also as harmless as doves. What that means is that when we know something, we should use it properly. So I want to go back to the 2016-2017 study that was done by the National Academies of Science and Engineering and Medicine in the U.S. And I want to just talk about some real quick conclusions they made. So after studying for almost 5 years, and they wrote this study in 2018, they said that there's no conclusive or substantial evidence. There is conclusive and substantial evidence that cannabis or cannabinoids are effective in the treatment of chronic pain in adults, as helping to control treatment of chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, and for people who have multiple sclerosis or any sort of spasticity disease. They said that the evidence shows that they're effective for improving short-term sleep outcomes. Fibromyalgia, chronic pain. All right? It also said that there is a limited evidence that shows that there is an association between cannabis smoking and the triggering of acute myocardial infarction, which are heart attacks, okay? And increased risk of ischemic strokes or subarachnoid or cerebral hemorrhages. But they realized that was not of statistical association between cannabis smoking and an increased risk of developing chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. All right? There is evidence of a statistical association between maternal cannabis smoking and lower birth weight of the offspring. I'll give you 2 more. There is moderate evidence of a statistical association between cannabis and the impairment in cognitive domains of learning, memory, and attention, even with acute use. All right? There is evidence of statistical association between cannabis use and impaired academic achievement and education outcomes. And lastly, there is a substantial evidence of statistical association between cannabis use and the development of schizophrenia or other psychoses, with the highest risk being among frequent users. Basically what they said was the main adverse effects outside of psychosis, all right, from the use of cannabis medicinally came from smoking it. All right? Not from the product itself. All right? Now, there's a reason for that. All right? We have this thing called the blood-brain barrier. That when you take in any product, it has to cross over from however you absorb it into the blood and then goes to the brain. All right? When you inhale something, it's much more quickly and more powerfully absorbed and crosses that blood-brain barrier quicker. All right? And so if you're smoking cannabis, particularly with THC levels above 0.3%, where we start to see the psychosis effect, the psychoactive effect of cannabis, all right? You're going to see it much quicker and much more if you smoke area quicker. So you expect to see the effects done. And of course, if you're putting a superheated gas in your lungs, whether it's marijuana, cigars, cigarettes, whatever, you're going to affect lung function. So what we have really said is there are ways for cannabis to be used properly. Smoking is probably not the best way for it to be used medicinally, and really should only be considered as a last resort when other forms, such as oils and tinctures and orally, or even cold vapor inhalation, like the inhalers we use for asthma. All right? And there are products out there with that. So, why is that critical for us? Because one of the things that we are advocating to the government is that if we're going to approve this, that the pharmaceutical cannabis that should be used should be pharmacy-grade cannabis. It should be properly made, properly labeled. As a physician, the physician should know exactly what the strength is, how best it should be used. And as a pharmacist, I should be able to know how I'm supposed to counsel my patient about it, and what side effects and adverse effects I should warn them about. All right? That's hard to do if you just tell somebody, go grab some weed and smoke a joint. All right? And I'm not saying that if they smoke a joint, they won't get relief from pain, right? But chronic pain is only one of the things that we're trying to treat. And some of these other things are life diseases that people are going to live with for years. And we must make sure that we're also not doing any harm when we're trying to treat them. All right? Lastly, I want to say this. The way forward for the church. Everything we do as it relates to our health should be based on the principles stated in 3 John 1 and 2, where John indicates the wishes of God, where he says that he wishes above all things that we not only prosper, but be in good health. It must be based on the principles of the stewardship concept, that our bodies are the temple of God, that they are given to us by God for his purpose and his glory. And whatever we do with that must conform with those two principles. And so it's important that and I see a number of the clergy here, that you educate yourself on this. Because the same way your parishioners are going to come to you to talk to you about theological and spiritual concepts, they need to be able to come to you and talk about this. And you need to be well-versed enough to at least know which direction you can point them in for good answers. And so I will leave that, in my layman's opinion, as an elder in my church, I could never just blindly support the use of cannabis products that have a THC content that produces a sustained mind-altering state. In other words, sustained psychosis. All right? I would definitely not advocate that smoking should be the first option to do it. And thirdly, more than anything else, I think we need to be able to look at each patient as an individual and say, what's the cost and what's the benefit? All right? And I deal with this when people ask me about taking products that alter their minds. They don't want to take the Percocet, they don't want to take the morphine. And it's a decision sometimes that the family and the patient has to make on their own. All right? But in the end, I think that if we look at this and we take the science, we take the scripture, and we take the common sense that God has given to us, there are ways for us to implement medical cannabis in a proper way that is safe and effective All right? The last thing I will say is anything or any system that moves a controlled medication out of the direct hands of licensed healthcare professionals is something I couldn't support. It reeks to me of a move to recreational. And I, as a pharmacist, could no more recommend recreational use of cannabis as I could recreational use of morphine. My oath prevents me from doing so. And I think we know the common sense behind that. So I want to thank you.
That was a lot of stuff. Between the three of these gentlemen, we have been well fed thus far. But guess what? It's Q&A time. You've been sitting there absorbing, thinking, what should I say at this time? I came here uncertain about to be or not to be. And now it's your time to even delve a little deeper to get the answer that you may need to take from this place. While Dr. Smith was doing his presentation, we were joined by my brother, who was a Rastafarian, Michael Minnis at the back there. It's good to see you. Yes, we have diversity in the house. And so thank you for coming and being a part of this audience. We appreciate you very much. Well, we want to make sure that, are there any questions while the audience in-house may be getting ready? Are there any questions? Are there any concerns? Are there any statements that are coming online at this time? Is there any questions? Is there any statement online? Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentations. And I just want to begin by giving a story. And I know both Dr. Smith and Dr. Linwood Brown would help with this process, because this is coming straight at Dr. Fox. One day, I was at church, and I smelled something behind the church wall. And there were two high schoolers smoking herb before they went to school. Now, I want to imagine what happens if the young junior high student goes to school high, and what the teacher would experience. What kind of disruptive behavior may occur? What if the student falls out in the school? How can he or she function and focus? My concern, and my great concern, is about how does the regulation of this legislation is applicable to protect the protection of minors, those who are under the age of 18. Dr. Fox, I know you know of a lot of young men who are smoking herb, and you have to care and treat them at Teen Challenge. Help us with what is going on with the young men in our society who are smoking herb and going to school. Hi. Mike? One second, Dr. Fox. Sound, go ahead.
But there's a bigger problem we tend to have in Nassau. To me, the smoking of marijuana is just like the leaf on the tree. We cannot just address the smoking, because most of these young men are using drugs just to cope. I go into a lot of schools, and when I speak to young people, there hasn't been a young person now that has not experienced a murder. When I say a murder, I mean that has not really seen someone who has just been murdered. Most young persons have seen that. Most young persons have experienced grief where someone who is close to them has been murdered. Most of these young persons come from single parent homes where they have to hustle. A lot of these young persons have already experienced trauma and abuse. So there's really no surprise to me that a lot of them are resorting to smoking at an early age. And once they start, and I'm talking from my experience, I started to smoke marijuana when I was basically 12. I was 12 years old when I had my first smoke. And believe it or not, that was my coping mechanism. That helped me to cope when I got home in the house where there was just a bunch of trauma and drama, and then it helped me to cope while I came to school. And once they begin to start to smoke, what's going on in class, and it affects everybody differently. Some places might be disruptive. Some places might just sit there and sleep. Some places might get the munchies. So marijuana is a psychological drug. It affects everybody differently. So when these young men might have come into my system, let me tell you, Dr. Bond, the common thing that I found a lot of young men that come into my program, even those who might be a little bit older than the normal teenager. Do you know a lot of young men in this country doesn't even have identification? They don't have no license. They don't have no passport. A lot of them doesn't have NIV. A lot of them doesn't have nothing to prove. So I spend a lot of my time as a justice of the peace running around trying to get them the basic identification for them to get a job or do job training. A lot of them, because of their distraction in home and in school, have been kicked out of school. They don't have the basic education. So they don't have any skill. They don't have any communication skills. And so honestly, sometimes when I look at them smoking, I not that I pardon them, but I can see why. It doesn't surprise me because, it doesn't surprise me that they smoke. Because when you check their background and you see all the trauma and all this hurt and pain and these different stuff they're going through, you can see why they resort to smoking. And so that's what really needs to be fixed. Not so much of any type of drug. Anybody who uses drugs mostly uses drugs because the same way people use illegal drugs is the same way for the same past or the same reason why people use legal drugs. There's something going on with them. Pain, problems, and so they use the drugs. They get probably antibiotic for the infection, then they get something for the pain, right? So now these young boys have been infected, so the drug is like an antibiotic, but it doesn't really help them, and then it helps with the pain.
So having worked with our anti-drug secretariat for almost 2 decades, and working with young men in the schools, one of the things that we see over and over again is that their first interaction with any illicit substance is from adults. It's from adults. Kids don't give kids drugs, all right? And it's my mother boyfriend or my older brother smoke one joint and he leave a little bit. And the same way how the children used to pick up the cigarette butts, that's what they do, all right? And so these are the things we have to look at. We have to address areas of access. But we also have to understand that there's certain things people can bounce back from, and there are other things that become harder. One of the questions I'm always asked is, well, if we're going to use medical cannabis, what's the age limits? And I always say this to folk. If we know scientifically that medicinal cannabis, that cannabis as a whole, impacts what we call brain modeling. It literally changes the way growing brains develop. on a physical basis. When they've done the autopsies, they see this. And ironically, what we've done is we've also realized through that, it was the cannabis research that actually redeveloped our thinking on addiction. We always thought of addiction as a willpower thing. What we're realizing now is that addiction's actually not just willpower, it's a physical remodeling of the brain. The brain, once it becomes addicted to something, physically changes to adapt to wanting that substance. Okay? So we call it the pathobiology of addiction. All right? And so when some people tell you, I really want to do this, but my brain is telling me I need this, they're not lying. Their brain has been remodeled for this. And the problem is the years of brain growth start in gestation and move to most people anywhere between 21 and 23 years old. And it can go up to 25. All right? And there are studies that tell us that for those of us who look like us, we're closer to 25. And that makes sense because these brains are the ones that made the pyramids that today's computers still can't figure out how they got made, right? So obviously our brain power was a little bit deeper. And so if that's the case, am I going to give my patient something at 18 or 19 or 16 or 17 that can impact their brain modeling? Particularly if we're talking about using smoking or even vaping, because go back to that blood-brain barrier I talked about earlier. That's the quickest way to get stuff to your brain. All right? The very quickest way. Inhale it. All right? And so we have to find ways that minimize, the same way we minimize how we can get Percocet and Vicodins and morphine. We have to put up gateways to minimize this. Because the fact of the matter is, if you open up this thing to a willy-nilly system where anybody could get a fake prescription because a marijuana card to their cousin who have a P.O. box in Miami, they pick it up, and now they got a medical card, and we're supposed to just fill it? All right? Understand the dangers of having a system that does not say that for every interaction that you get this medication, you have to go to a physician. You have to then see an actual pharmacist. Two people who got a license on the line. All right? Because the fellow who only 21 years old, right? And that's his only qualification, and you paying him the same thing you paying the Wendy's person, the same way all of us knew somebody when we was at COB, when we go to McDonald's and get a free meal, they give away McDonald's stuff all the time, they can give away the stuff too. They can sell it out the back door. It's in them $600 a week. They have nothing to lose. But people ask me all the time, how is it that y'all don't see the rates of opioid abuse and all the other things? And working in the hospital, I can tell you, because when the overdoses come and they come in, and in pharmacy, we're the ones who have to issue the products and restock it. Why is it so low compared to some of these other places around this region and around the world? You know why it's low? Because it's hard for you to get a Bahamian doctor who everybody knows to write you a fake prescription, then take that to a pharmacy where that pharmacy is probably owned by the pharmacist who was working there. Okay? They ain't taking the chance. It ain't worth it. But you set up these little stores around you, and people ain't got nothing to lose, they sell all your product out the window and out the back door.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Dr. Brown?
Good evening again. To address the initial question asked by Mr. Minnis in terms of what safeguards a young child from getting it, legislation is written in a way that persons under 21 would not be permitted to get these cards only under extreme situations and circumstances and under the guidance of a physician. Secondly, I would like to address what Dr. Smith mentioned about a prescription coming from an overseas physician. That's not entirely the case. Having spoken with the writers of the bill, the Attorney General Office, as well as the Minister of Health, in the being a person licensed by the Bahamas Medical Council, globally, there's no reciprocation of medications. with prescriptions globally. There's none. I cannot give you a prescription here in Nassau and you go to Walmart and fill that. It doesn't happen. Vice versa is also true. You cannot bring a prescription from Walmart to take it to pharmacy in the Bahamas and get it filled. So that's not entirely the case. I haven't spoken with the Attorney General, I haven't spoken with the Minister of Health. There's no, the person may have a medical card from a different jurisdiction. A card only indicates to the Bahamian doctor who has to prescribe it for that patient, what that patient is on and why that patient is diseased. In the doctor's interview process of that patient, he will gather more information, to verify that there's anything that because of drug interactions, what other medication the patient is on, what allergies the patient has. So it's not entirely the case what Dr. Smith alluded to, that a person can come from a prescription from a jurisdiction in Timbuktu and take it to a pharmacy that can't be verified. That was thought of before in the 2023 bill, and after consultation with the Bahamas Medical Council, the doctors at Bahamas Medical Council, who guard our profession jealously, vehemently stated that that cannot happen. And I must say that the Attorney General, as well as the Minister of Health, heeded. The Minister of Health is also a physician, and one day he will be back in the private world, and it'll be foolhardy for him to do something that he cannot benefit from in terms of reciprocation of medications being given to patients traveling overseas. So that's not necessarily the case. Now, the bill may be written in a way that it may give that misconception, but in the definitions of the bill, it says physician equals a person licensed by the Bahamas Medical Council.
Let me say something. We speaking about the bill and something we put in writing in legislation, right? But we have Apostle Henry Higgins here. We know on the ground that ain't reality, right? We know on the ground, it doesn't matter what they put in writing, we know prescription. Right now, tonight, in the morning. So we can talk about all what they put in writing. Me and Henry, we work on the ground, and we know on the ground, you can get anything you want on the ground. So when we're talking about marijuana, when you got a lot of persons who are addicted, once that bill go through, it can be open season for all. Once these shops or whatever set up, you will be able to get it. My question is any resources going to be provided for the fall off? Because there can be a fall off.
Right.
The people can show up to me and some other places. So is there any provision in the bill? They said they have provisions in the bill for the gambling, right? That institutions like mine can get something, right? No people are housing right now who don't lose their home or lose their gun and shut down their shop and thing. You know, people are like, all right, okay, and I might get $5,000, hey, Henry? They might put something in writing, but the reality on the ground is something else. This is the Bahamas, this is Nassau, this is the Pirate Haven, this place is rogue. Anyway, I know
Thank you.
Let me give you a 1 minute rebuttal to what Dr. Fox said. In anything done, the Bible speaks that man is inherently evil. So the bill is not going to be 100% efficient to capture the evil of man's heart. The bill is a guideline to help minimize it. It will happen. No one is running from that. It shall happen. No one is running from that.
What, the bill?
But the evil of a man's heart, giving people prescriptions and medications without the necessary paperwork. That will happen.
Yeah.
But it's happening now. Cannabis is not a new industry in the Bahamas.
Big industry too.
Cannabis has been in the Bahamas for decades. This is a way to regulate it, because it's here. I could challenge any one of you in here that if you want to get a joint right now, someone could call their cousin Pookie, who could direct them to the weed shop to get it. The bill here is designed to minimize that. And even Canada, Canada 2018, September 18, 2018, Canada went medicinal, went whole legal use of marijuana. Today in Canada, 70% of all marijuana sold is still sold on the black market. So you will have that.
Black market.
Yes. You will have that regardless. This bill seeks to try to align it. And in a country where our former coat of arms was expulsus, exploratus, restitutus, commercia, Paris expelled, commerce restored, we still have remnants of piracy here. So that will happen. No one is going to be naive to believe, no one is going to be naive to believe that it can't happen because it's legislation.
Dr. Brown, thank you so much. Thank you so much. But one of the concerns there, the brain modeling issue that Dr. Smith made reference to, it doesn't appear as if the legislation confirms the age threshold concerning the brain modeling. Is that correct, Dr. Smith?
It does not give a concrete level. I think and it shouldn't. And I'll tell you why it shouldn't.
Yes.
You should allow physicians to assess their patients
Yes.
and individualize it. I'm all for, listen, healthcare should write policy. Policy shouldn't write healthcare.
Right.
Okay? Now, I will say this. This is one of the problems you have when well, you know, I grew up right down the street, you know.
Yeah.
Right on Flamingo Avenue. Okay, so I can pretend like I back there. One of the problems we have when people cut and paste and then bring us documents is they forget what they cut in part 1 and then what they paste in part 2. Because Dr. Brown is correct. It speaks to a medical practitioner. And it says that a medical practitioner shouldn't do this unless they examine X, Y, Z, so and so. But then it goes back in section 4 of subsection 4 of section 39, where it says access to medical cannabis. I'm reading from the draft. And it says, where a patient presents his medical cannabis card issued in a recognized jurisdiction, a medical practitioner may prescribe cannabis for that patient without conducting a full in-person medical assessment under subsection 3A. The issue that I have with that is twofold. One, they've given a list in the schedule of these countries where these cards will be recognized, okay? But there's no process for us to authenticate the cards. People come here every week, go to Atlantis and Bahamas, and rip them off with fake American Express and Visa and MasterCards every week. And ain't nobody got a better system for verification than the credit card companies, okay? I tell my credit card that I travel with is through Commonwealth Bank. I'm giving them a free plug, right? And I got it because my office is here. The office is here. When I travel and I say I'm going to Atlanta, and somebody tries to use my card number in New York, my phone rings, and it's Miss Mason, Allison's sister-in-law from Commonwealth Bank. Say, Dr. Smith, you told us you were going to Atlanta. You going to New York and they didn't tell us, say. I said, I am in the airport flying home. They said, oh, somebody trying to use your card. We're going to lock it down. And if the credit card companies with that sort of real-time verification are getting ripped off, it is so easy for somebody who's coming from Slovenia or Slovakia or Poland, where their card's not even in English. All right? How then is my good friend, Dr. Brown, okay, supposed to take that card and they say, I suffer from chronic pain? They've been coached in the answers that they need to give, all right? And chronic pain is not something that he may be able to test for at the moment. But they have this card, all right? It even ain't in English, all right? It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the Bahamas, which means it is 10:30 p.m. in Slovakia. Who are we going to verify it with? How are we going to know it's real? If he goes into a database, the number might be real, right? But the ID the person shows them could be fake. But see, these are all things we have to look at, because what the criminals do is they look to see where you've created a weakness and then they exploit. Our thing is, if we've identified the weakness, then fix it before we put it in law. And then we have truly what Dr. Brown has said. Anybody who gets a prescription filled in this country, it will be actually written based on the assessment of the physician and not any sort of backdoor. Because while Dr. Brown, who has been doing this for years, will take the time and assess his patient. And I know him, he's a good Bahamas Academy boy, right? That's what we do. But who says the next Dr. Brown is going to? The law should be set up so that the guidelines place people in the proper boxes so that they move in the proper paths. It should not create a deviation. And that's all we're saying. We agree with the act, we agree with the fact, and we're glad that the government changed it from the first draft to the second draft, but there's some other things that they need to do, because at the end of the day, our problem is this. We understand what the purpose is. We also understand that people understand what the abuse of it is. And for every one of us who's trying to do it right, there are going to be people who want to do it wrong. And we need to make sure that we do that. The other thing we need to make sure is that we don't create the roads for people to take the shortcuts. Yeah. We shouldn't do that.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. I have to cut on that session at this time. We have a question coming in from West Palm Beach. The question online, the THC that is activated in the marijuana joint when smoked, is that the same THC activated when the marijuana is dispensed as medicine? Can someone answer that?
Delta 9 tetracannabinoid is a heat-labeled compound. It's what's called broken down by heat. It's activated by heat. The active ingredient, it is lipophitic, means it likes fats, like my wife. So it once the THC in the compound, when it's smoked, burnt, because that's how it's activated, is the same that is in the compound in the pharmacies. We have 9 delta and we have 10 delta. The active ingredient that is psychotropic is the 9 delta. So it's broken out from 10 delta to 9 delta through combustion. And we put the 9 delta in the pharmacological product. So the person will get the same 9 delta tetracannabinoid, which is the THC as we abbreviate it. So yes, they are the same.
Yes.
In a nutshell.
Okay, that's from Pastor Leonard Grant out of West Palm Beach, Florida. Also, we have Ross Marcus asking a question. Blessed love, Dr. Brown or Dr. Smith, do cannabis give off a chemical reaction? And the Bible says that the Lord made herb for the service for man. So why do you doctors want to modify jar plant?
So my first introduction to cannabis as a medicine was in 1996, my first year in pharmacy school. My professor actually used to work at the University of Mississippi with one of 2 federal cannabis research facilities at the time. So understand that everything we use is modified. Even when you, in the words of my good Rastafarian brother, consume jar plant, whether jar plant is cannabis or whether jar plant is mango, your body can't use the mango just as it is. It has to break it down. It digests it, it absorbs it, it metabolizes it. There's always a change in what's happening. And so you must look at your body as almost like a manufacturing facility. Now, the good thing is that we have in our bodies cannabis receptors. We have CB1, CB2, and there's now even more research saying that we might have a CB3 there. Cannabis is, if there's a plant that's been made for humans to utilize and metabolize very easily, it's cannabis. Let's not run away from that, all right? All right? So the Creator made cannabis for us to use, all right? I don't think He made it for us to smoke. That's just my opinion, because you got to destroy it to smoke it. Everything else that you have to heat up to cook, you don't destroy it, right? So when you roast a peanut, you still got a peanut, right? You don't go from peanut to ash, all right? So that's my personal opinion. But I will also say this too, and this is why one of the things that when we looked at the first draft, I can tell you this. I was the one, myself and Dr. Marcus Cooper, who raised the point, what about the sacramental use? You have to account for that, all right? I believe that one of the best things God has given us is the power of free will. And sometimes that means we worship him in different ways. And it's not my job to tell somebody their way is right or wrong. My job is to first worship him and try to be the best example I could be. And I told them, I said, you have to go back and talk to not just our Rastafarian brothers and sisters, our Hindu brothers and sisters, all right? Our Sikh brothers and sisters. All of them, for thousands of years, have used cannabis sacramentally. Now, where does Seventh-day Adventist boy who ain't never smoked marijuana in his life get that from? Because I spent 5 days in the Blue Mountains with the Rastafarians as a part of my research. I live with them, I watch them how they plant and everything else, right? And I was happy that they respected me enough to know that I wasn't going to partake, but I was here to get the information, all right? And one of the things I learned, contrary to what I've been taught for years, is that their use of cannabis as a sacrament goes well beyond just smoking, all right? And that we have this idea that all they do is sit around and smoke. That's not the case, all right? So this is, I'm hoping that these sort of forums, and I'm really disappointed in the fact that the government that has promised us real national dialogue on this has not yet done a single government town hall on this. That's ridiculous, okay? I'm talking about a national town hall. I'm not talking about in pockets and in constituencies, but a national town hall in which they sit in the seats and listen to the people. Because a town hall shouldn't have the minister and the prime minister and everything else. What it should have is a representative from the Rastafarian community sitting and talking, a representative from medicine, a representative from commerce, a representative from agriculture. These are the things we should be doing to create a proper dialogue on this. And I'm hoping that my disappointment is temporary, that that's coming. I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt. But we have to look at that, because when we talk about sacramental use, then what are we going to do? Are we simply saying to them, you have to be able to grow your own, and that becomes a completely closed-off subsect? Or are they allowed, as a sacrament, to then get it dispensed by some other method or means? These are things that we have not yet worked out. And you know, Eric made a comment to me in my ear, and he said, that's why we got to get this fixed. We have to fix this before we take this to Parliament, all right? Because as a Bahamian, I should not want anything to go to Parliament that restricts, that marginalizes any of my brothers and sisters, even if I don't agree with their beliefs or I don't agree with their opinions. It should never marginalize a group of people based on that. And I think that's important.
Thank you.
Okay, let me get my start with the question with the Rastafari. I think Dr. Smith addressed it, that everything we take has a metabolic process, and smoking it actually creates a thing called hydrocarbons. And this is why the smoking of cannabis seemed to have more related adverse effects than cannabis taken by any other module, in any other method. So that is perhaps part of the reason. But let me get to the National Town Hall. In July 2018, the then administration of the Bahamas government impaneled a thing called the Cannabis Commission. I had the privilege to sit on a commission. Our job was to codify the national views of Bahamians regarding medicinal cannabis or cannabis use. What is not entirely true, Dr. Smith, is that we went and we had town hall meetings. We had town hall meetings in Exuma, which I attended. We had town hall meetings in Eleuthera, which I attended. We had town hall meetings in Grand Bahama, which I attended. We had town hall meetings at the Kendall Isaac Gym, which I attended. On our panel, we also had a pharmacist, you know the pharmacist. So we had meetings. We also used surveys, national surveys. We did 3, and cost the government a lot of money to do these 3 surveys. The surveys were conducted in person in Millennium Gardens, Stapleton Gardens, South Beach, Bamboo Town, Beantown, I attended these. So we not only had town hall meetings, we actually went door to door, more or less like a campaign to ask questions, receive answers, and codify the views. Then we did 3 surveys at the expense of the Bahamas government, and all that survey was compiled. Since governments are continuous, when the government changed, instead of redoing all of those, the government chose to build upon the existing information we had. We went to the Rastafarian camp. On that committee, we also had a member of the Rastafarian community in the form of priest Richmond. He stood on the committee and his views were heard. Now, our report that was done by our committee, headed by Mr. Quinn McCartney and Mr. Reverend Bishop Simeon Hall, they were co-chairs. Our report made mention specifically to the sacramental use for Rastafarians. We did not want to discriminate anybody. The Rastafarians, the Hindus, and other persons who have this for sacramental use were included. We took painstaking measures to include it. So what is being said is not entirely the truth. I was there. I was a part of the team. And we ensured that we were fair to all Bahamians. We ensured that we heard the views of Bahamians. Now, you personally may not have been contacted, but that's how surveys work. They're done randomly. We may have been the one we missed. And if that is the case, we apologize that we didn't get to do all 400,000 citizens.
Yes.
But we did a large sample enough group to give us a view and opinion based on those sample results.
Okay, thank you, Dr.
I think let's clarify. When I said there hasn't been town halls, I was referring to this draft that's come out this year and this government. We know that governments are, on paper, continuous. We also know that in the Bahamas, the practice has always been stop, review, repeal.
Right.
Okay? And also I think one of the things that has been a game changer is since that 2018, which was a very comprehensive effort, a number of things have changed, not just in terms of research, but in terms of the parameters in which the import and export can be done, because in 2018, Trump did a change where he passed the Farm Bill that included approving hemp, and then we now have the additional moves that have been made, not just by states, but by the federal government and their intent to continue doing that. So as things change and things grow, the conversation, I think, still needs to continue. Now, as it relates to, again, this particular draft, when this particular government came out, and let me be clear, I'm not on any government side. I'm a Bahamian. Don't make a difference to me, right? But when this particular government brought this out, they indicated to the people that they would have consultation. When we went to the meeting with the AG and the Minister of Health last summer, that again was given to us as an association as a promise, that they would involve a discourse, and they laid out how they would do that. None of those things have been done. And I think the fact that we have so many questions and uncertainty about it is because there's been a lack of clarity in terms of a directed focus on educating. When they did the gambling referendum, listen, they had meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, and everybody at least knew what was coming down the pipeline, whether you agreed with it or not, all right? We need to do a better job on this stuff, and which a gallon of that is almost $30,000, okay? These are the things that people need to know, all right? And they should be coming led by a national effort. And I think that's what's sort of missing.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Thank you very much. Come and give us the panel a hand for that very robust, interactive session. And I think it's very important that the government should lead the way in communicating to the people, because it's the people who the government serve. And so I think if you say something, do something. At this time, I have another communication coming online from Dr. Mortimer Moxie. He is congratulating this committee and congratulating the presenters. And he is from the University of the West Indies Alumni Association, Bahamas chapter. Dr. Moxie is saying, and his question is, which group were consulted
before the bill was formulated? And why do the regulations seem to be weak when compared to another recent act for the control of stem cell therapy in the Bahamas? That's a heavy one. Which group was consulted? Dr. Mortimer Moxie, a very prominent physician in the country, is asking.
I have the pleasure of knowing Dr. Moxie from way back when, coming home. The government has, in the previous administration, consulted a lot. And we spoke with the medical associations, and after all of our consultations, we codified our views. The incoming administration didn't see the need to reproduce the same effort at another cost to the Bahamian people. So the incoming administration used those same research gathered. I know they can be mad at me saying this, but they used a lot of that material that was already researched, already consulted.
I think he's referring to now. So
Yeah,
there's been,
like I said,
which group was being consulted?
like I said, because the consultation had already occurred, we didn't want to reproduce the same effort.
Now, I guess it looks like I've been beating up on the government all night, but I will give them kudos on this. When we met in the summer, last summer, I think it was last July or August, all right? We went and we met with the AG and the Minister of Health. They had the Medical Association there. They had invited the Pharmacy Association, at which at that time I was the Vice President, the President went. We indicated to them that the council should also be there. And when we did that, they invited the councils, the Medical Council, the Nursing Council, the Pharmacy Council to come in. They had just there, so on and so. They had people in the room, okay? And they indicated that they would also meet with some other folk. We indicated to them that, and you know, I ain't shy. That's one thing about me. If you ain't figure that out, for those of you who don't know me, I ain't shy. So I said to them, I don't know why you're having a conversation in here that's dealing with this. There's nobody from agriculture. I indicated that we had to have a representation from folk who use it sacramentally, and that simply interacting with the Christian Council in its form that it's in left them out, and they needed to be included. I indicated some other things. It was my understanding that those things would be reached out to. Okay, so and I assume that they were. Okay, because they reached back out to us in the Pharmacy Association, and we wrote them a document with a critique on what the first draft of what they sent out to us was. We wrote them a critique. Now, they never send us back any communication to say, hey, we got your critique, we agree with points 1 to 2 and 3 to 5, we don't think so, and 6 to 7, let's sit down and talk about it. We gave it to them. We saw some things change, we didn't see some other things change. I've been as blunt on airwaves as probably anybody, because you could be blunt when you ain't personal. See, I don't speak for Marvin. I speak as the president of my association. I speak with my membership. We've sat and discussed and say, all right? So it ain't against nobody or for nobody. I'm simply speaking for my members. We see some deficiencies. We've noted what we think those are, and we want those to be addressed, all right? And we're adamant that either they get addressed before you go to Parliament, that's when they should be addressed and fixed, or if you pass the law this way, then we're going to seek to have it addressed afterward. Whether that means we go to the Supreme Court and ask for judicial review, whether that means that we have to maybe start in other areas in which the government and us work together, we may have to say, can two walk together unless they agree? And since we ain't agreeing, we can't walk together. Okay? Those are things we have to look at. But what we've been actively and aggressively asking, and at this point, I don't even, and again, it ain't personal. I understand how government works. Once a bill has been tabled, ain't no minister could change that. Only one man could change that. One man could put the brakes on that and say, stop, bring it back, let's do it. That is the leader of the government. So we have made our interventions direct to the Prime Minister and said, look, you need to pull this back, because we feel like what you have as a final product, what you're calling a final product, is not good enough. And there's some basic, easy fixes that if what you're saying, which is We are looking to establish a medical regime for cannabis that also allows for sacramental use. If that's what you're saying you want to do, what you have on paper is not the best, proper, and effective way of doing that. And we're the professionals in the industry. That's what we admitted it. He says, yes, it's not adequate, but we could address that later. You should not bring something like this when you have the ability to address it now. And there's no rush, and I'll tell you why there's no rush. If you want medical cannabis to be dispensed in the Bahamas, you could do it tomorrow. You don't even need a law to do it. Right now, the minister could just authorize any physician he wants to do it. They fill out a form, they send a request, they approve it. All right? That's not a problem. All right? So there's nothing that stops a patient today who needs medical cannabis today from getting it. All right? What we want to do is make it easier. All right? So let's get the stuff. Bring it back. Let's get all the ingredients. Let's get the proper insight. All right? And one of the mistakes we make in government, I've worked for the government for 24 years. I've worked for all sorts of administrations. One of the biggest mistakes we make is that we believe that the people sitting around the table who work for the government from 9 to 5 are the only source of wisdom. That ain't so.
One quick intervention here. Dr. Smith, are you suggesting that when you made mention earlier on someone who is 21 and not qualified and can make recommendations or provide medicinal information, are you saying that the government is seeking to dumb down the profession?
The government is not seeking to dumb down the profession. The government is seeking to create a whole new profession in my mind, because if you look at the draft, these medical cannabis dispensers for medical cannabis puts that patient in danger. It makes no difference if they know listed. Very few of them are going to have cannabis as what we call monotherapy, the only medication they're on. So all of these are critical things that have to be in place, and if you have somebody else who isn't qualified to do that, you're putting patients at risk.
Thank you.
But the truth of the matter is that I've never had that done to me yet with no pharmacy.
Oh, yeah, we do it. We just do it.
Yeah, my dirty and I going to. Yet that sat me down and asked me what I own and value 9 happen yet me down and do that to me yet.
They have it in your record there.
You think so? But
excited about this additional tool should have happened, because I've seen being help patients, and if this addition to our toolkit permits us or allows us or facilitates us health to our patient needs, as do economics to our pockets, it's going to allow us to expand what we have in our arsenal to do so. So again, I thank the Bahamas government for allowing us to speak to. We first got involved in cannabis in 1996. I predate that by 7 years to 1989, because I happened to go into Jamaica as a young man at 17 and saw the plant for the first time, was amazed. And there begins my curiosity. Started off from 1989. I've never, ever used cannabis in any forms. My interest in cannabis is purely from a scientific and a medicinal point of view, because I realized through research that this can help people, and that's my entire purpose, to help people.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I just want to follow the money. It's about the well-being of the patient. Is that correct? Before you go, Dr. Smith, is there any question from the audience, any statement from the audience? There's a mic here, and Pastor Davil, sorry. Go ahead, Pastor Higgins.
I have one concern. which wasn't really mentioned here, juveniles. And just Tuesday gone, I was speaking, I said to them, where do you see yourself for the future? And I said, what they're going to farm. And they said,
Thank you.
80% of our prisoners who admitted to Majesty's prison tested positive for cannabis, 80%. That was in 2000, up to 2008. Now, I don't know what the numbers are now, but that's in 2008. Now, speaking to the young man or the young men, you said they want to be farmers if this legislation goes. So that's commendable, and because of license for cultivation of cannabis based on the legislation. So they will be right in line with coming from the black markets into the mainstream economy formed for the industry. I'm not privy to that information yet, right? But at least, to my point, they are coming from the black market to be contributing members of society without the involvement of criminal activity.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Hernandez, and then Pastor Davel, I think.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you very much. This is much informative. I wear several hats. While I'm part of the Diaspora Committee, as the Director of Missions of Bahamas Faith Ministries International, Senior Pastors has been very involved in this type of conversation. I wish he was here, but he is in Africa in a tour on a mission right now. He would have been also very helpful. So I would like to share, first of all, that he has been conducting researches on the same topic. He has an article on the Guardian, and then he also has a YouTube presentation on his view. I'd like to ensure that all present know that we have additional information on that as well. As an educator, my concern is, and it has a lot to do with the last question, do program or some sort of educational approach as to the outcome on the other side, because we are very excited as to, okay, let's regularize it, we're gonna save some people from pain. All of that is great. There are very important facts shared today that can tell us that for some it might be beneficial, but we also understand that loose leaves are difficult to regulate. So let's say the bill is passed as is, which I hope is reviewed and it goes through the Pharmaceutical Association and more facts are considered. Do we have a plan, an education vehicle to train people, to train the community? Do we have a way to create a conscience on how to use it properly? Have we worked on it? Because you cannot just work on regulating it without considering the other side, you see? So even those who are trying to come out of their penalty and have they been trained as to the responsibility that they have now if they decide to go into this profession, and should it be approved? So what do we have from the education standpoint to ensure that should this be really considered, it benefit Bahamians?
Okay, I stated earlier about, based on the legislation, it will seek to form a cannabis licensing authority. In Jamaica, there is a cannabis licensing authority. Their responsibility is the regulation of all things cannabis. So everything is routed through them. Educational, training, as well as vetting of persons who want to get into business is done via the Cannabis Licensing Authority. That authority will be responsible for the things that you are mentioning. Persons who want to get in the business of cannabis, getting your education in terms of from a business point of view. We will lay the framework from which criteria will be set, but the authority is not responsible for persons who want to get into business, but the action of it, the delicensing, the fines and penalties that may come from the authority will all be done via the Cannabis Licensing Authority. As far as the education goes, that is something I believe the government ought to also play a pivotal role in doing the PR work. Because if this thing is going to come, the government will have to do more to make it more known to the Bahamian people what is coming, what is the result of it coming, how it could benefit not only in the healthcare, but also in revenue generation for the country. I think the government, the onus is on the government to do that aspect of the PR and educational, or to do their own market research, gather information, form your business plan, get your what is finances you ever need, and then apply based on the application criteria.
Thank you. Pastor Anthony Davil, Central Baptist Church.
Good evening. Good night, everyone. My question is to Dr. Brown. As far as research, we've heard that the medical marijuana gives relief for pain and other symptoms, other diseases. Is there any research that the medical marijuana...
Actually, okay. we mentioned the receptors. Dr. Smith mentioned briefly the receptors, CB1, CB is located in all aspects of the brain, right? The CB1 receptors are more immune regulations, hematopoietic cells, red cells that make blood. That's where CB2 receptors are generally found. In that, they are also on organs. Now, menopause is a hormonal, for the most part, a hormonal regulatory function. Estrogen, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, various different hormones women produce. And when that falls below a certain threshold, symptoms of menopause emerge. Now, because cannabis plant is a G protein regulator, they have what they call ligands. Ligands attach is a molecule that attaches to another molecule to cause an action in a distant place, similar to endocrine function, right? We have not found a direct linkage where it works centrally, causing a state of euphoria, therefore relieving the menopausal symptoms, but not actually fixing the source of the menopause, if you understand what I'm saying. It doesn't get the hormone levels back up, but it makes the female who is going through the menopause feel better.
What about erectile dysfunction, Dr. Brown? What about erectile dysfunction? You might as well fix that. Let's talk about that, you know?
So the answer, in addition to that, so there was a study that was completed about 2 years ago by Boston Women's, which is a major female-based healthcare system in Boston, where they actually used medicinal cannabis, none of it in the smoking form, actually, to treat women with postpartum depression, which sometimes also can be hormonally based. And what they found was some really good results. And so we think that that's a foundation, and the next step of that study is to look at other issues, including other hormonal imbalances and menopause as a whole. Menopause is used particularly in smoking, because smoking as a whole reduces your sperm count. It produces your sperm production. It produces the virility of your sperm. It reduces the ability of the sperm fluid. Basically, if you don't want to have no fun, smoke a lot. Okay? And so anything you do with smoking, you're going to find a correlated point. And this is why, again, when we look at what, we can't just say, well, people are smoking cannabis and that's what it is. It depends.
They use for cannabis is sativa and indica. Phenotypically, how they look. They are different looking plants. The sativa plant is slimmer and the leaves are more narrow. The indica plants are generally shorter plants and broader leaves, right? They cause a different effect. One makes you sleepy, one makes you excited, right? The sativa, indica is best for in the night. Indica in the night because it makes you go to sleep. Sativa causes increased cerebral activity, believe it or not. It causes, increases excitability, and it causes 3 H's: happy, hungry.
That I would endorse the Bahamas to go forward with the medical marijuana, and it should be. I do know about some of the medical goodness of the marijuana plant, or cannabis is what people might call it. My dad was a herbalist, and we
on, but we want to.
With 9 children in the house, you only had time to get sick. So, again, on behalf of the Pharmacy Association, I want to thank the team here for inviting us. And I will close with a comment from the Pharmacy Association before a personal note. Pharmacy Association has been really the premier endorser and agitator for medical cannabis use. The second, the last Hubert Ingram administration. That's the first time we wrote. We then wrote again under the Perry Christie administration. All right? And we were ready to go, and it got started. And now we're working with the Davis administration. This ain't political for us. This is about our patients. We want to make sure that we give administrations didn't get it done, and we got it done right. And that benefits every Bahamian, whether you wear gold, red, green, or whatever. It benefits us as a people. And so that's what we want as an association, and we are going to fight to make sure that it happens. All right? And we hope that as the people of the Bahamas, that you will stand with all of us who are trying to make this get done properly, so that at the end of the road, we could look back and say we were a part of doing something right. So I want to thank you, Reverend Menace. I want to thank our folk online, Zoom. I want to thank my two of my friends, you know. I've known this man almost all my life, and I've been working with him since I came back in 2000, all right? Every time I call him to come help with whatever group, it was the Simpson Pen, we were volunteering at, my boys club at Gerald Cash, my Pathfinders, whatever, Eric's been.
We have Deacon Julian Anderson Roll, Esquire, I call him, in the booth along with Marla Joy. They are media technicians. Come on, put your